At the beginning, there was a house shown with the name Higashikuju. A boy was seen saying the word fiancé with a tense face. He asked his father what it meant. His dad said he was sorry and admitted he hadn't told him until now. He addressed him as Hiroyuki and explained that right after Hiroyuki was born, his father's company was on the verge of bankruptcy. At that time, a large company had provided financial support, and thanks to that, they were where they were now. The father had wanted to repay the favor to the president of that large company somehow. The president had said then, "Let's marry your son to my daughter. They are the same age after all." That, the father claimed, was what he was told with a smile. Hiroyuki reacted by saying, "A large company," and wondered how that made sense when they were just a normal family. He said that marrying the president's daughter had no benefit. His dad responded that actually, it did. He explained that their family was a branch of the prestigious Higashikujo family of Kyoto. Moreover, that daughter the father said Hiroyuki knew her quite well. This made Hiroyuki react with a shocked expression, saying it couldn't be. After that, Hiroyuki was seen sighing and walking while thinking. He thought to himself that it was the start of the school semester, and encountering something like this was unbelievable. He couldn't believe he had a fiancé. And that fiancé, he thought, was none other than then a girl with long black hair was seen standing in a school uniform. Hiroyuki was stunned upon seeing her. Suddenly, someone called out Kuryu-san, and a boy came to her and said he wanted to hear her answer about what he had told her the other day. She replied with "huh," and with a cold face asked who he was. The boy was confused and said "huh" again. She asked him who he thought he was to speak to her out of nowhere. The boy said "a what?" and reminded her that he was the one who had confessed to her the other day. She told him not to talk to her and asked how he could confess to her with that face and attitude. The boy stammered that it was just that, but she interrupted and asked if he had anything to be proud of: money, physical skills, or test scores. This made the boy's face go scared. She added coldly that whatever it was, there was no chance she would ever be interested in him. She told him to disappear from her sight as soon as possible. The boy, now scared, ran away, made a relieved face. Then Hiroyuki said Kuryu-ian. She turned to him and with wide eyes said, "You're Higashikujo Hiroyuki." He replied that he was, but before he could finish, she asked if she could have a moment of his time. Then she corrected herself and said better yet, he should make time if he didn't have it. Hiroyuki responded with an unsure and was then seen walking away with her. Two girls were watching them. One of them said, "Hey Ryoko, look at that. That's Hiroyuki, right?" The other asked, "Huh, who is that next to Hiroyuki?" As they walked away, Hiroyuki had a tense face and was thinking. He thought that if someone was a student at this private school, Tenshokan, then they definitely knew her Kuryu-yan. She was the perfect lady, a top student, athletic, and the only daughter of the massive Kuryu conglomerate. Her appearance, he thought, went without saying. Then she turned toward him and said something. Hiroyuki thought to himself that to the students she was. Before he could finish his thought, she asked him if he knew what she was going to talk about. Hiroyuki said, "Huh, and she said that it would be easy to understand then." She introduced herself as his fiancé and said, "Nice to meet you." When he didn't respond, she asked if he could hear her and demanded that he at least respond. He thought that the problem was her rather strong attitude, that was why they called her a villainous. He apologized and said he was honestly surprised. He explained that that very morning he was suddenly told he had a fiancé, and he asked her if it didn't bother her. She said it didn't bother her at all and added that she had no interest in him personally. What she was interested in, she said, was the name Higashikujo. Even as a branch family, the Higashikujo family was a noble lineage that dated back to the 5 regents. For the Kuryu family, this was the best possible match to cover their weaknesses. He repeated the phrase, "a good match," and admitted that he didn't know much about family lineages. She replied that she had figured as much. Hiroyuki then made a tense face and thought to himself that she didn't seem very excited. He wondered if it was really all right to accept this relationship as it was. She then said that they should take some time to talk about something more constructive and asked if he had time after class. She told him that her father had prepared a new house for them to live in together. Hiroyuki shouted in surprise, repeating "a new house," and asked if he had the option to refuse. She answered no with a straight face. Suddenly someone said, "Hey Hiroyuki." He turned and asked, "What are you doing here?" Then he muttered, "Damn it." Ian stayed silent. Hiroyuki asked, "What's going on, Fujita?" "I was talking with Kuryu." Fujita explained that the first and second classes had joint PE lessons with the second years and reminded him that he wouldn't have time to change. Hiroyuki acknowledged this and said, "That's right." He then turned to Ian and told her, "Well, Kuryu, I'll see you after class." She responded with yes. Then she said, "Fujita-kun." Fujita replied nervously with yes, and she asked him what "damn it" meant. Then with a cold face she said, "You'll pay for this." Fujita responded with a startled hyen and they walked away. Fujita then asked Hiruki what he had done to the Villainous. Hiruki said he didn't do anything. Meanwhile, she was still standing, watching them as they walked away. The scene then moved to the gym. Hiruki explained that between Class 1 and 2 and Class 3 and 4 there would be a practice match. He then confronted Ryoko and Tomomi, saying they were the ones who had told Fujita. The two girls were shown reacting. Ryoko admitted that they had seen Kuryu-san taking Hiruki aside to talk alone. Tomomi asked if he had made Kuryu-san angry. Hiruki, clearly frustrated, wondered aloud why everyone assumed he had made Kuryu mad. Fujita pointed out that Ryoko and Tomomi had always been scared of the so-called Villainous. Hiruki asked if Fujita wasn't scared too. Ryoko claimed that Hiruki had been acting strange and mentioned that Tomomi had said so. Tomomi, embarrassed, quickly denied it and said it was just because Hiruki had left them and gone ahead alone. Hiruki responded awkwardly, asking if he had ever said he'd go first. Ryoko told him that if he had a problem, at least they could listen. Tomomi added that Hiruki was very easy to read. Hiruki, looking tense, said it wasn't something they needed to worry about. At that moment, Kuryu appeared from behind, holding a basketball, and warned Hiruki in a low and cold voice not to say unnecessary things. Hiruki immediately tried to change the topic and said that if they didn't warm up, they might get injured. Ryoko commented that Hiruki was acting weird. Hiruki sighed. Fujita pulled Hiruki aside and hesitantly began to talk. When Hiruki asked what it was, Fujita revealed that he liked the same girl as Sejima from Class 4. In a moment of impulse, both had agreed to compete in that day's class to see who would confess first. Hiruki was shocked to hear that, pointing out that Sejima was a candidate for the basketball team captain. He said Fujita didn't stand a chance. Fujita begged Hiruki for help, offering to give him a pair of movie tickets if he won. Tomomi suddenly jumped in and immediately accepted the deal on Hiruki's behalf. She grabbed his hand and pulled him forward, saying he had to come too. Hiruki, still confused, asked what was going on. The scene shifted again to show the teams lined up on the court. Someone from the opposing team shouted at Fujita, accusing him of cheating by bringing Suzuki. Hiruki thought to himself that he had seen this coming. Tomomi stood firm and asked if they were afraid of losing to girls. One of the boys responded with confusion. Tomomi smiled and reminded them that if the girls won, the girls' basketball team would have the gym all to themselves for a week. One of the boys dismissed the claim and said it had nothing to do with the current game. Hiruki, now holding the ball, thought to himself that the whole situation was a hassle. He glanced at the basketball, then turned to stare at Kuryu. The game began. A girl blocked a shot, another dribbled skillfully, and one of the girls managed to score. Ryoko and Fujita were shown watching and reacting to the plays. Tomomi passed the ball to Hiruki, who looked to his left and passed it to Fujita. Fujita wasn't expecting it and awkwardly caught the ball. Tomomi puffed out her cheeks in frustration. The score on the board showed 21-23. Hiruki thought to himself that the Class 4 members were pretty good. Even though Tomomi's level was far higher, their team was still at a disadvantage. He turned his attention back to the court and saw a girl playing with sharp skill. It was Kuryu. Hiruki noticed two boys nearby talking about her. One said she was good at both studies and sports, calling her perfect. The other commented on her beauty. Hiruki, watching, silently agreed and thought she really was just like the rumors described. Then the boys added that despite everything, she was still a villainous. Suddenly the ball came to Hiruki. Tomomi shouted at him, asking why he was just standing there and reminded him there was no time left. Fujita also called out, asking what he was doing. Ryoko joined in, calling for Hiruki. Hiruki started thinking about what everyone would say if they lost. As he hesitated, two players began surrounding him. Just then he heard Tomomi's voice calling his name. He quickly grabbed the ball, his expression becoming serious, and threw it. The court exploded with noise. The crowd shouted in disbelief, questioning whether Higashi Kyujo had really scored from that position. Hiruki wiped the sweat from his face using his shirt. People began crowding and talking, saying how incredible he was and wondering if he had played basketball before. Hiruki replied humbly that it had just been luck. Ryoko and Tomomi then rushed up to him and hugged him together. Tomomi praised him for doing a good job, while Ryoko excitedly told him he was amazing. At that moment, he heard someone else congratulating him. When he turned around, he saw that it was Kuryu. She said it simply and then walked away. Hiruki stood there thinking about how he had a fiancé, a childhood friend, a friend. The new semester had only just begun and only 2 weeks had passed. But despite all that, he felt like his new life hadn't even started yet. After the match ended, someone announced that the score was 24-23. Ryoko questioned if they had won, while Tomomi pointed out that it had been against Class 4, the class that housed the next basketball club captain. Fujita ran up and, while hugging Hiroyuki with one arm, exclaimed that it was all thanks to him. Hiroyuki responded with a tense expression. Fujita asked if Hiroyuki had ever played basketball before. At that moment, Tomomi ran up, called out to Hiroyuki and hugged him, startling him. She expressed that she had believed in him, saying she knew he would definitely make the shot. Hiroyuki, flustered, told her to calm down. Ryoko stepped in, trying to stop Tomomi. Fujita laughed in the background. Meanwhile, Kuryu silently observed the scene from a distance. Seeing Hiroyuki surrounded and laughing with others made her expression turn sad. As time passed, someone called for everyone to get changed. Fujita approached Hiroyuki from behind and handed him something, reminding him of the earlier promise to give those if they won. Hiroyuki attempted to downplay it, saying Fujita didn't need to thank him. Fujita, however, insisted. Then he teased Hiroyuki, suggesting he go with Suzuki. Hiroyuki reacted with confusion, wondering why he would bring Tomomi along, his face clearly tense. Fujita expressed disbelief, shook him, and warned him not to make Suzuki cry too much. Hiroyuki denied doing any such thing and muttered that it wasn't any of Fujita's business as the latter walked away. Just then, Kuryu passed by Hiroyuki. As she walked ahead, Hiroyuki turned to watch her go. He reminded himself that this wasn't the time to be fooling around after all. He was supposed to visit his new house after school that day. The thought of a villainous noble lady and a fake marriage alongside Kuryu Ayanami filled his mind. When the school bell rang, Hiroyuki approached Kuryu and apologized for making her wait. Kuryu criticized his lateness, saying she didn't want to attract unnecessary attention and urged him to move quickly. Hiroyuki agreed, acknowledging her concern. As they walked together, whispers and gossip followed them from the students nearby. While walking, Kuryu hesitated and then suggested that they talk about something. Hiroyuki, feeling awkward, agreed with hesitation and internally acknowledged the awkwardness on his end as well. He took a moment to think and then pointed out that they seemed to be heading toward the station. He asked where the new house was. Kuryu informed him it was in Naiatsu, 2 stations away. Hiroyuki thought to himself that Naiatsu was a high-class residential area. Kuryu asked if he was dissatisfied. Hiroyuki clarified that he wasn't dissatisfied but rather anxious. He admitted that he had never imagined living in Naiatsu, a place he had thought he'd never be connected to. He recalled the surprise of suddenly being told he had a fiancé and how Kuryu had then proposed visiting the new house. He had been half expecting a black luxury car to pull up in front of the school gate. Kuryu dismissed the idea and explained that she wouldn't do such a thing. Her expression showed unease as she confessed that if she ever did something like that again, she couldn't predict what others would say. She looked into a mirror and reflected on her public image, expressing that she didn't want to invite unnecessary malice. She was fully aware that she was being talked about behind her back and acknowledged the bad impression she gave off. Hiroyuki looked at her and tried to reassure her. He reasoned that if they commuted from the new house, it would only be 2 stations away, so they would take the train. He added that he didn't know how much time she usually spent in a car, but at least she wouldn't need to commute in a flashy vehicle anymore. Kuryu, keeping a straight face, hesitated and then suddenly bowed, apology. Zing, Hiroyuki was confused by her apology. Kuryu explained that it was her father who had made arrangements without asking about Hiroyuki's circumstances. She bowed again. Hiroyuki quickly told her to wait and tried to stop her. Later, at the station, Hiroyuki and Kuryu sat beside each other. Kuryu admitted that she had been flustered that morning and had taken it out on him. She remembered telling him that she wasn't interested in him personally, but after observing him that day, she realized he wasn't a bad person. She admitted she had always imposed her family's status on him without considering his situation or the feelings of others. Hiroyuki repeated the phrase, others' feelings to himself, and Kuryu clarified that she meant Suzuki-san and Kama-san. Hiroyuki realized she was referring to Tomomi and Ryoko. He was surprised that Kuryu had considered them. Kuryu stared at him and Hiroyuki, flustered, asked why she was looking at him like that. Kuryu smiled, noting that Hiroyuki truly wasn't a bad person. Hiroyuki, startled, accused her of thinking something rude again. Kuryu suddenly asked if he had ever been popular. Hiroyuki flatly denied it. She then questioned why Suzuki and Kamo, 2 highly sought-after girls, had stayed around him without boyfriends. Hiroyuki's face tensed and turned red. He thought to himself about how Tomomi and Ryoko were indeed popular and began to reflect on their feelings. He admitted that he had always tried not to think about it since they had been together since they were little. Kuryu responded that that was exactly the problem. She pointed out that to everyone else, it was obvious those two were into him, and if not, then it would seem as if he had brainwashed them. Hiroyuki told her she didn't need to be so blunt. He sighed and admitted he couldn't compete, saying it was just like her to act like a villainous. Kuryu stood up, clearly annoyed, and declared that she hated that nickname. She walked off while Hiroyuki remained sitting. The scene transitioned to an apartment complex where Hiroyuki and Kuryu were now walking together. Hiroyuki called out, saying he had already apologized and begged her not to leave him behind. He followed closely after her. She turned around while softly laughing and admitted that she was only kidding. Hiroyuki laughed nervously, asking her not to scare him like that. Kuryu explained that while she didn't like the nickname, she was definitely mouthy by nature. Hiroyuki told her that if she was aware of that, she should try to fix it. Kuryu said it was impossible, claiming her words were like her shield. However, she added that she wasn't as harsh as her words might make her seem. As she turned back, Hiroyuki replied that he understood her now, though he still wore a tense expression. Kuryu pointed at him and asked if he had the confidence to love her as his partner. Hiroyuki looked at her and honestly said he didn't. She smiled and said she didn't either. Hiroyuki reminded her that they had just talked about this. Kuryu explained that even if they didn't love each other now, spending time together might change that. She suggested that for now they should work toward building something together. She extended her hand toward him and smiled. Hiroyuki agreed and returned the smile. Kuryu said it was nice to meet her fiancé. Hiroyuki responded in kind, calling her his fiancé as they shook hands. As he held her hand, Hiroyuki reflected on how she laughed, sulked, and considered not just him, but others as well. Her warm hands reassured him that, even if it was just a little, they had taken a big step forward together. Kuryu Yan stood there smiling, her cheeks slightly red. At that moment, he thought that perhaps she wasn't really a villainess after all. They arrived at a large apartment building and appeared stunned, one of them asking in awe if this was their new home. They proceeded to take the elevator. During the ride, Hiroyuki asked Kuryu what exactly her father did. Kuryu responded sharply, questioning the implication and calling it rude. Hiroyuki clarified that wasn't his intent. He explained that her father had lent money to his dad and then immediately arranged for a luxurious apartment, suggesting that he must be an amazing person. Kuryu admitted that calling him amazing might be an overstatement and explained that he was simply the president of an IT company. She then pointed out that Hiroyuki himself seemed like the heir of a noble family from another era. Hiroyuki responded that he hadn't even known about that until a few days prior. Kuryu recalled that, looking back, her cousin Akemi always spoke in a very refined and ladylike manner. When Hiroyuki confirmed she meant Akemi Higashi Kujo-sama, Kuryu said that she had met her a few times at parties. She looked at Hiroyuki in a way that made him nervous. He asked what it was, and Kuryu said it was nothing, although she wondered if Akemi was really his cousin, given how glamorous she is. Elways appeared. Hiroyuki explained that Akemi was his second cousin, and added that it wasn't unusual if she didn't resemble someone plain like him. Kuryu commented that in noble families like the Higashikujo family, whose bloodline had continued for hundreds of years, similarities were usually more apparent. Hiroyuki asked if that was how such things work. The elevator stopped at the 32nd floor. They scanned a card and stepped into a beautifully designed room with a view of the city. They stood there stunned by the scenery. Approaching the glass, they looked out at the cityscape, and Hiroyuki said the place felt like a dream. As they shared the moment, Hiroyuki's stomach growled. He apologized, saying that the tension must have eased. He opened the fridge, expecting it to be empty, but found it fully stocked. He remarked in amazement that, as expected of Kuryu's father, the fridge was filled with high-quality ingredients, meat, vegetables, and even Kyoto tofu. He remarked that with so much food available, they could make a luxurious dinner. Kuryu hesitated, looking embarrassed. Hiroyuki suggested they make something together, and Kuryu, surprised, noticed an apron and put it on after removing her blazer, seemingly thinking it was a bit much. Hiroyuki instructed her to start by cutting the tofu and vegetables while he prepared the rice. Kuryu hesitantly agreed. While Hiroyuki washed the vegetables and whistled, he noticed Kuryu giving off a strange, intense expression. He asked her if something was wrong. Kuryu, flustered and defensive, insisted that she wasn't to be made fun of and that she could cook at least. Hiroyuki thought to himself that he hadn't even said anything yet. Kuryu awkwardly grabbed a knife, her hands trembling, and attempted to cut the tofu while nervously laughing. Hiroyuki reacted in alarm, wondering if she looked like a serial killer about to commit a heinous crime. He warned her that it was dangerous and rushed to grab her hand just as she nearly lost her balance. He caught her in his arms and they found themselves very close. After helping her regain balance, Hiroyuki gently put her hand down and commented that it had been a close call. Kuryu apologized, visibly blushing. They both looked flustered. Hiroyuki pointed out that she had been the one in danger and said that if she didn't know how to cook, she should have mentioned it. Kuryu protested, saying it was because he kept preparing more and more ingredients. Hiroyuki internally questioned whether it was somehow his fault. Kuryu explained that the house staff had always handled everything for her cooking, cleaning, and laundry. Hiroyuki reassured her that it wasn't embarrassing to not know those things. Kuryu then asked how he had become so skilled at it. Hiroyuki explained that both his parents worked, so he used to cook meals for his younger sister. When Kuryu asked about her, he said her name was Akin and that she was currently attending a prestigious sports school in Kyoto on a basketball scholarship. He added that even their neighbors, Tomomi and Ryoko, often came over, which gave him more opportunities to cook. Kuryu simply acknowledged what he said. Hiroyuki then announced that the food was ready and served the meal. Kuryu asked what it was, and Hiroyuki explained it was his special Italian-style mappo tofu. Kuryu hesitated, thanked him, and took a bite. Her face lit up in surprise, and she admitted it was delicious, covering her mouth in awe. Hiroyuki commented that even if it wasn't restaurant quality, having the right ingredients made all the difference and that homemade meals were always best. He encouraged Kuryu to begin learning how to cook little by little, noting that since she had worked so hard in both academics and sports, she'd be able to pick it up in no time. Kuryu paused, then reflected that this must be the flavor loved by his sister and childhood friends. She addressed Hiroyuki by name and began to speak. As he listened while eating, Kuryu suddenly stated that, as his fiancé, she wouldn't mind if he kept other women on the side. Hiroyuki was shocked and asked if she was still concerned about Tomomi and Ryoko. Hiroyu clarified that it wasn't about them. She simply didn't want her children to go through the kind of humiliation she had. No matter how hard she tried at academics or sports, people always mocked her for trying to climb the social ladder. She insisted that her desire to bear the Higashikujo name hadn't come from her father, it was something she had chosen for herself. With a serious expression, Hiroyuki told her that his family also owed a debt to her father. He explained that this wasn't just about her personal desires and that saying it was okay to cheat on her was wrong. Kuryu was visibly stunned and blushing. Hiroyuki, with a serious tone that shifted into a cheerful one, suggested that for now, they focus on her cooking. Kuryu reacted with surprise. Hiroyuki said that she would have a lot tea. "Oh, deal with later, but she should worry about that when the time comes." He reminded her that although people had mocked her and spread rumors, she had always managed to learn and do everything anyway. He pointed out that even the fiancé arrangement was something she had willingly committed to. He told her that if that was the case, then she could work hard and learn to cook too. He encouraged her to stop dwelling on small matters and focus on eating for the time being. Kuryu smiled and admitted that she would probably mess up at first. Still smiling, she asked him to please teach her properly. This made Hiroyuki blush and he told her, of course he would. Kuryu thanked him warmly, calling him by his full name. Later that evening, Hiroyuki walked alone, thinking about how late it had gotten. He reflected that Kuryu must have felt a lot of pressure and that he was glad he had gotten to know her better that day. He told himself that from now on, things would get busy with moving preparations. Suddenly, he heard someone call out his name. He turned in surprise and saw two girls standing in front of him. He immediately recognized them and thought to himself that their two childhood friends had found out. He called out in shock, realizing it was Tomomi and Ryuko. Hiroyuki made a tense face as he looked at Tomomi, who also seemed tense. He then looked at Ryoko, who had the same expression, and asked them why they were there. Tomomi shot back with annoyance, asking why Hiroyuki was in such a fancy residential area completely opposite to his house. She also demanded to know where Kuryu-san, who was supposed to be with him, had gone. Seeing Hiroyuki's tense expression, Tomomi told him that he was easy to read and asked if he really thought he could hide it from them. Ryoko, looking apologetic, said she was sorry but explained that Hiroyuki had been acting strange since morning, so she had been worried. Hiroyuki, now angry, said that even so, following him around was too much. He insisted that he wasn't doing anything. Ryoko shouted back that he was the one being too much, not them. Both girls blushed, and Hiroyuki was stunned. Tomomi reminded him that she had told him before if he ever had any troubles, she would listen to him. She said that sneaking around and keeping secrets was the worst thing he could do. Thinking about Kuryu, Hiroyuki shook his head and realized he should talk to Tomomi and Ryoko about it. Finally, he gave in and told them he would explain everything. As evening approached, both Tomomi and Ryoko sat in shock after hearing what he said. A fiancé, they both repeated in disbelief. Hiroyuki confirmed it, saying that it wasn't a lie. I and Kuryu and he were engaged. They remained stunned as he explained that at first he had felt the same way, which was why he hadn't wanted to say anything. They asked him why this had happened, and he told them it was because his dad's debt had been taken over, and Kuryu apparently wanted the name of their main family. He explained that it was a matter of mutual circumstances. Suddenly, Tomomi stood up from the bench, and Hiroyuki, concerned, asked what was wrong. Tomomi, with a scary face, declared that she was going to punch Hiroyuki's dad in the face. Hiroyuki quickly tried to stop her, telling her to calm down and asking Ryoko to help. But Ryoko, with an equally scary expression, told Tomomi not to aim for the face but to go for the stomach instead. Hiroyuki yelled at them to stop, but Tomomi shouted, asking what he meant by fiancé and debt collateral, saying it was practically human trafficking. Ryoko agreed, saying there was no way this was acceptable. Hiroyuki tried to calm them down again, telling them he had also thought about it after hearing the story. He explained that if his dad's company went under, the people who had taken care of them since they were little would suffer, reminding them that they had gone on trips with those people countless times. Tomomi acknowledged that it was true, and Ryoko, although still upset, stayed silent. Hiroyuki said he couldn't take away those people's livelihoods, so he thought it would be best if he just put up with it. Tomomi and Ryoko exchanged looks, and Hiroyuki added that besides, Kuryu wasn't as bad as they thought she was. He began to say more about Kuryu, but was cut off when Tomomi, looking stunned, teased him, saying he had got pretty close to Kuryu-san in just one day. Ryoko asked if Hiroyuki had feelings for Kuryu-san, which made him flustered. He denied it, insisting it wasn't like that. Tomomi laughed, surprising him, and said she would believe him about Kuryu-san. Ryoko, looking serious, told him not to leave them behind and keep secrets anymore. Tomomi added that if anything happened, he needed to tell them honestly. Hiroyuki agreed, admitting that it had been his fault. The three of them seemed happy again as they walked together. As night fell, Tomomi stretched and complained that raising her boy had made her hungry. Ryoko suddenly exclaimed, asking Hiroyuki to make that for them. Both girls excitedly requested mapo tofu Italian style with happy expressions. Hiroyuki blushed and stammered, asking why they wanted it again, explaining that he had just made it for Kuryu earlier. He thought to himself that having to make mapo tofu Italian style twice in one day was seriously too much. Both girls suddenly froze, staring at him, and he became tense, wondering if he had stepped on a landmine. Tomomi said in disbelief that it was unbelievable. Ryoko, also upset, said that even though there were other dishes, why did he have to make that for Kuryu? Hiroyuki tried to explain himself but was flustered. Both girls shouted at him, blushing, saying that mapo tofu Italian style was the taste of childhood friends. Hiroyuki was left speechless as they ran away, calling him an idiot. He stood there, confused, wondering what he had done wrong. The next morning, Hiroyuki walked to school thinking about how he hadn't slept well. He felt overwhelmed by family debt, a fiancé, and angry childhood friends, thinking that problems were piling up out of nowhere. He noticed that Tomomi and Ryoko weren't there and wondered if they had left ahead of him. At the school gate, he saw Kuryu standing and remembered that she was supposed to start commuting by train from that day. Calling out her name, Kuryu turned to him and smiled. As he approached her to greet her, Tomomi came running towards them with a grin on her face, followed by Ryoko, who was trying to catch up. Hiroyuki looked at them in surprise as Tomomi greeted Kuryu and extended her hand, asking if she wanted to eat lunch together. Kuryu was stunned, and so were Hiroyuki and Ryoko. At school, inside the classroom, Hiroyuki sat at his desk with a tense expression. He wondered to himself why Tomomi had invited Kuryu for lunch. His mind was filled with confusion as he recalled what Akin had told him the previous night about some memory related to that dish. He wondered if he should have talked to Akin sooner. A flashback crossed his mind. He remembered Akin sounding angry as she spoke to him over the phone, saying of course she'd be mad about what had happened. She told him that Ryoko-chan and Tomomi-chan had been furious in their messages too. Hiroyuki had asked her why and what was even the problem. Akin, sounding shocked, asked if he was seriously saying that, and said she was honestly kind of disappointed in him. Akin explained to him that mapo tofu Italian style was the taste of childhood friendship. She asked if he didn't understand that, mentioning she had heard it directly from them too. Hiroyuki, still confused, told her that didn't explain it fully. She sighed and told him to listen carefully, reminding him that back when they were kids, all their parents were busy working. During those times, the dish he made for everyone, which was their absolute favorite and the most delicious, was his mapo tofu Italian style. It had become an unforgettable, nostalgic menu item for all of them. Hiroyuki was stunned to hear that and asked in disbelief if they had really thought about his cooking that way. Akin explained that eating it by themselves without anyone else was unthinkable for them. She even told him that Akemi had bowed her head to Tomomi-chan and Ryoko-chan, asking them to let her eat it too. Hiroyuki was surprised to hear Akemi's name and repeated it with shock. Akin, sounding embarrassed, quickly told him not to tell Akemi she had said that. Smiling softly as he remembered those days, Hiroyuki thought to himself that back then, they didn't care about things like the main family or branch families or about status and lineage. They had just spent time together freely. He realized he had never thought that his cooking was such an important part of their memories, but then he thought further. If it was something so precious to all of them, shouldn't they let Kuryu eat it too? After all, Kuryu had a lot on her shoulders as well. He wondered if Tomomi and Ryoko would trust him and Kuryu together, and imagined them all eating it with her. His thoughts were interrupted when Akin yelled at him through the phone, asking if he was even listening. She reminded him again that mapo tofu Italian style wasn't something he should just let some random girl eat so easily. Hiroyuki's face turned tense as he told Akin she was taking it too far and told her to apologize. Akin, surprised, asked if he was mad because she had called Kuryu some random girl. She demanded to know who this Kuryu Yan was anyways, was she his girlfriend or some sudden new character, and asked if Kuryu had gotten her permission first. Hiroyuki shouted at her to stop, and blushing deeply, told her that Kuryu was his fiancée. Akin fell silent for a moment before letting out a shocked and frustrated sigh. The flashback ended, and Hiroyuki sat staring out the classroom window, thinking that in just one night, things had gotten even more complicated. As he scribbled in his notebook, he thought about how he and Kuryu had both accepted their engagement for the sake of their families. But then he remembered what Akin had said about Akemi-chan being Uncle Terahis's daughter, the one and only girl he adored beyond measure. And as for Akem's most probable marriage candidate, he thought with a faint smile that apparently it was supposed to be him. He thought he was doing the right thing by accepting the arranged marriage and admitted to himself that he couldn't just ignore Kuryu either. But to think that even the main family and Akemi would be involved in this matter. On top of that, he hadn't realized how deeply Tomomi and the others felt about his cooking. They had told him they trusted Kuryu and him, but that was before they had discussed the food. There were just too many things he didn't know. He glanced at Tomomi and Ryoko, letting out a sigh, and thought to himself what a mess everything had become. He wondered why his dad had to make everything so complicated. Meanwhile, some of his classmates turned to stare at him as he sat there lost in thought. The bell rang and Hiroyuki opened his eyes, thinking to himself in surprise if he had fallen asleep. Someone called out to him, saying, "Oi here, Uki," and he turned to see it was Fujita. Fujita looked at him and asked what was with his face. Hiroyuki, looking tired, replied that it was just a lot of things. Fujita noticed his notebook and said, Hiroyuki immediately reacted with a flustered expression, covering the notebook and asking Fujita what he needed. Fujita said no, explaining that Hiroyuki had been groaning through the entire class, and he thought he was still stressing over yesterday's ticket. He asked if Hiroyuki still hadn't given it to Suzuki. Hiroyuki realized he hadn't and said, now that you mention it. Fujita started to ask him about Tomo, but then noticed the classroom was empty. Hiroyuki realized it too and thought to himself in panic that lunch had already started. Fujita called after him, asking where he was going, but Hiroyuki had already started running out of the classroom. As he ran through the hallways, Hiroyuki thought to himself that lunch must be at the rooftop since Kuryu had been called out. He kept running, thinking desperately for Tomomi and Ryoko to stop. While rushing up the stairs, he wondered if they weren't going to trust Kuryu and him after all. Reaching the door in front of him, he thought to himself that he didn't want them fighting Kuryu just because of some stupid memory. He opened the rooftop door to see Tomomi and Kuryu standing in front of each other, locked in a dead stare. Hiroyuki called out to them hesitantly, telling them to stop, and that if they just talked things out. Tomomi suddenly smiled brightly and said, hey. You're late, Hiroyuki. Kuryu stood there quietly, and Hiroyuki responded with a confused huh. Kuryu looked at him with a stern stare and asked him if he had told them. Hiroyuki froze with a tense face as Kuryu continued to stare at him, repeating her question in a quiet but firm voice, asking if he had told them. Tomomi then clapped her hands cheerfully and said, "Alrighty then." Smiling widely, she told everyone that now that they were all there, they should sit down and talk things out. Ryoko and Kuryu stood beside her and Tomomi continued smiling, telling Hiroyuki, "Right, Hiroyuki." Hiroyuki stood there stunned in front of them, thinking to himself in confusion, wondering if they had been waiting for him all along. His mind raced as he stood frozen, wondering desperately what he should do in that situation. They were at school on the rooftop. Tomomi had spread a blanket on the floor and sat down while Ryoko stood nearby. Hiroyuki was standing too. Feeling tense, and Kuryu stood expressionless. Hiroyuki looked at Kuryu with a tense expression, thinking to himself that even so, Kuryu was pretty intense. She looked at him questioningly, and he explained internally that there had been so many people around, and yet the moment they sensed she was in a bad mood, they had all vanished. Kuryu blushed slightly upon hearing his thoughts, and then her expression turned serious and slightly scary. She told him that the reason she was in a bad mood was because of him. Asking why he had talked about their engagement. This made Hiroyuki visibly scared. Ryoko and Tomomi chimed in, agreeing that they wanted to hear about that too. Both Hiroyuki and Tomomi looked stunned as Tomomi spoke further, saying she thought they should hear Kuryu's side of the story too while having lunch. Seeing Tomomi smile softly, Kuryu also smiled slightly and agreed, saying okay. Tomomi thanked her gently, and seeing this, both Ryoko and Tomomi smiled, as did Hiroyuki. Hiroyuki then called out to Tomomi and Ryoko, telling them that yesterday Akin had told him a lot of things. He explained that his cooking had been something really important to both of them, hadn't it? He apologized sincerely, saying he hadn't thought that far ahead and insisted it wasn't Kuryu's fault. As he spoke, Kuryu looked down, her expression sad. Tomomi raised her hand slightly and Ryoko spoke first, apologizing to Hiroyuki and calling him Hiroyuki-chan. Tomomi then added that they should be the ones saying sorry to him. Hiroyuki looked stunned and replied softly, "Eh." Tomomi explained that Akin had scolded them last night too, and Ryoko said that Akin had told them if something was bothering them, they needed to say it directly to Hiroyuki. Still stunned, Hiroyuki muttered Akin's name under his breath. Tomomi and Ryoko in unison added that honestly, it was their fault for expecting that kind of emotional awareness from their big bro in the first place. Hiroyuki looked shocked and confused, exclaiming, woo, before complaining that Akin didn't help at all. Suddenly they heard someone laughing. They turned to see Kuryu laughing softly, and Hiroyuki, now annoyed, asked her what was so funny and if even she was laughing at him now. Kuryu, still smiling, replied that it was because it was just like she had said before, that was exactly the kind of person he was. Tomomi and Ryoko glanced at each other and smiled. Tomomi declared that since they had said what they wanted to say, they should finally eat. Kuryuki sighed, thinking that somehow, he was the only one who ended up embarrassed. Ryoko tried to comfort him, saying that wasn't true, right? Kuryu, however, only smiled and said softly, "Hee who knows." The four of them then sat down together to eat. Kuryuki looked at Kuryu and thought about his fiancée, then glanced at Tomomi and Ryoko, thinking about his childhood friends. In his mind, he thanked his little sister, thinking that thanks to Akin, things might finally settle down. He told himself that he really needed to become a bit more considerate himself. Tomomi was sitting on a blanket she had spread on the floor, happily eating while saying how tasty it was. She urged Kuryu to try some too, telling her to say, Kuryu, flustered, tried to resist, saying, wait, but Tomomi ended up shoving the food into her mouth anyway. Kuryu chewed and then admitted with a small smile that it was delicious. Tomomi grinned proudly, saying she had made a lot, so Kuryu shouldn't hold back and should eat up. Kuryu thanked her softly, saying, thank you. Tomomi looked at her with surprise and commented that she was just a little shocked. She had never thought she would hear a thank you come out of Kuryu's mouth. Kuryu looked stunned, but before Hiroyuki could scold Tomomi, Kuryu told him it was fine. She explained quietly that it was only natural to think that way. Holding her own hand, she said that ever since she came to this school, she could count on one hand the number of times she had said thank you. She hadn't really done anything worth being thanked for either, but since Tomomi had gone out of her way to invite her and prepare everything, of course she should at least say thanks. Her expression looked sad as she spoke. Ryoko softly called her name, Kuryu-san, while Hiroyuki quickly added that he had told them Kuryu wasn't a bad person. Kuryu lowered her gaze and said that besides, she was Higashikuju, Kun's fiancé, so to both Tomomi and Ryoko. She must be the enemy, right? Tomomi and Ryoko glanced at each other silently. Kuryu continued, saying there was a part of her that wasn't totally okay with it, but yeah, she guessed so. She apologized quietly. Ryoko hurriedly told her not to apologize, saying it was all because of Hiroyuki's dad and his family situation. Hiroyuki thought to himself that it was so true, he couldn't even argue with that. Kuryu turned towards Ryoko, starting to say something. "You too, Suzuki-san, but before she could finish, Tomomi shoved more food into her mouth, telling her to say, ah. Kuryu chewed and said softly that it tasted sweet. Tomomi scolded her gently, telling her not to make such a gloomy face. She said enemy or ally wasn't the point. She explained that in basketball, everyone they faced in matches was technically an enemy, but she didn't hate or resent them just for that. They were all people who loved basketball, so she couldn't bring herself to dislike them just because they were opponents. Kuryu looked stunned at Tomomi's words, while Hiroyuki thought to himself that he totally understood what she meant. Ryoko, however, looked at him exasperatedly, thinking to herself that he absolutely did not get it. Tomomi continued, saying that if they really had to say enemy or ally, then maybe opponents were the enemy, but people who loved basketball were allies. She said that people who just used basketball were the real enemies, and that meant Kuryu wasn't an enemy at all. Kuryu looked stunned again and softly thanked her. Hiroyuki turned to Ryoko and asked her what they were even talking abo. And Ryoko thought to herself that he didn't get it after all. Tomomi then added that, like Hiroyuki said, Kuryu wasn't a bad person. She said being called a villainous was honestly ridiculous and that she didn't really like that nickname. She explained that talking to Kuryu today had made it clear it was really just people being jealous. Tomomi suggested to Kuryu that maybe she should try changing how she acted around others. Just doing that could change how everyone treated her. Kuryu looked down, saying quietly that they were right, and she knew it would make life easier that way. But with a sad expression, she asked why she had to compromise the things she had worked hard for just to meet others. That was what she ended up thinking. Everyone fell silent at her words, stunned. Ryoko and Tomomi both stared at Hiroyuki, who thought to himself that he understood what Tomomi and Ryoko were feeling. He wanted everyone to see the real Kuryu too. He thought that maybe there were parts of herself that Kuryu would need to change for that to happen. Looking at her, he thought that both Kuryu and himself. From now on, at that moment, a cheerful voice interrupted his thoughts. A girl appeared, calling out to them brightly. She waved and smiled, saying, "Yuhu, here, Uki-senpai, let's have lunch together."